Welcome to Terrifying Creepy Stories, the place where the dark corners of forgotten places come alive through bone-chilling true tales. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. And to my loyal subscribers, thank you for always returning to the shadows with me. Before we dive into tonight's haunting story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next terrifying upload. And tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these creepy stories travel. Now, turn the lights down, and let's begin. Story 1. It's been about 3 years since this happened, but I still find myself thinking about it at night, especially when things get quiet. It wasn't anything violent, nothing that made headlines, but something about the whole thing just burrowed under my skin. It still creeps me out. Back then, I was 21, just settling into a small apartment in Ghent, Belgium. It was my first place away from home. I shared it with a classmate, Robin, and we both attended the local university. The apartment was on the ground floor of a narrow, aging building that backed up into a stretch of quiet woods. It had a creaky little balcony that faced the trees, nothing fancy, just a low railing and some cracked tiles. The kind of place you tell yourself is charming to justify the rent. That night, it was close to midnight, and Robin was out, probably with his girlfriend. I had been up late playing Mario Kart 64. We'd set up my old console on the bedroom TV a few nights prior and had gotten into this habit of playing stoned until we passed out laughing. It was a good way to unwind after classes. Anyway, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, half zoned out with the controller in my hand, when I heard a knock on the front door. It wasn't strange, really. Robin had a bunch of friends who would drop by unannounced. I figured it was just one of them coming to pick something up or maybe crash on our couch. Still, I got up slowly, not in any rush. The hallway light was off, and everything felt quiet in that heavy late night stew. I walked up to the door and checked the peephole. I remember jolting back a little. There was an eye, pressed right up against the peephole. So close, it looked like it might push through the other side. It startled me, sure, but then I kind of chuckled. That was totally something Robin's friend Timo would do to be annoying. I unlocked the door and opened it. Only it wasn't Timo. Or anyone I knew. The guy standing there looked maybe 25 or 26. Shaggy dark hair, wiry frame, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet like he had too much energy, and nowhere to put it. He was wearing a gray hoodie with a stain near the collar, and jeans that were too short at the ankles. Something about him just buzzed wrong. He was smiling, but it didn't feel warm. It was twitchy, like a mask that wasn't staying on right. "Hey," he said, with way too much enthusiasm. "Sorry to bother you. Just going door to door for this uni initiative. It's kind of a survey thing, trying to connect students across departments. Got a minute?" His words poured out fast, like he was trying to distract me. All the while, he kept shifting on his feet, craning his neck to peek past me into the apartment. He was subtle about it. Well, not really. He even went up on his tiptoes a few times, trying to get a better look inside. I tried to be polite. I told him I was a bit busy and didn't have time for a survey, but thanks anyway. He kept going. Something about connecting the arts and science students, asking if I liked poetry, asking what program I was in. None of it made much sense. The whole time, he wouldn't stop looking around. Not at me, around me. Eventually, I got tired of it and told him, firmly, that I wasn't interested. I started to close the door, and that's when his hand shot out and stopped it. I froze. He looked up at me, still smiling, still bouncing slightly on his feet, and said, "I like Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 too." At first, it didn't register. I just blinked at him. Then something cold slid into my chest. "What?" I asked slowly. I figured," he said quickly. "You've got that couch. Retro game, right?" "Makes sense." The couch. My grandmother's old floral print thing. ugly as hell but comfortable. It wasn't even in the same room as the Nintendo. Hell, the console itself was stored inside the cabinet when it wasn't being used. From the front door, you couldn't see anything past the tiny hallway and maybe a sliver of the kitchen. "How do you know I was playing Mario Kart?" I asked again, this time quieter. He paused. His eyes darted to the side. "Oh, just a guess. You know, lots of people are into old-school games these days." Then he practically leapt backward. "Anyway, gotta go." He turned and hurried off down the hallway, half jogging, not looking back. Just gone. I stood there for a few seconds, staring after him, my hands still on the door. When Robin came home maybe 15 minutes later, I told him everything. He went pale. "You think he's been watching us?" We grabbed a flashlight and went out the back. The balcony faced the woods, and in the dark, it felt like the trees were leaning in, listening. We checked my bedroom window. The blinds were always shut. Always. But we tried crouching down near the glass, pressing our faces close. You had to get your eye almost flush with the window to see inside. And even then, only from the right angle, and only if the lights were on, could you glimpse the edge of the bed and TV. And only if we were actively playing would the console be visible. Which meant he'd been there. Outside. More than once. We checked the railing. There were faint scuff marks on the lower part. Right where someone might have boosted themselves up. I hadn't noticed them before. Why would I? After that night, I stopped leaving the blinds even a sliver open. I got obsessive about locking the windows. I'd lie in bed with the lights off and think about that face. Was he out there now? Pressed against the glass, waiting? I never saw him again. Not in the hallway, not at the university, not lurking in the woods behind the apartment. Story 2. I've never liked sleeping outdoors. Even as a kid, something about the woods at night made my skin crawl, not because of wild animals or ghost stories, but because it always felt like something was watching. Like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Still, I agreed to go camping with my mum last summer. She lives in southwest Wales, tucked near the Brecon Beacons, and I'd flown in from Manchester to spend a couple weeks with her after a particularly brutal stretch of work. She's always been the outdoorsy type, hikes, wild swimming, kayaking, the lot. I figured a weekend in the mountains might do me some good. We left early on a Friday morning, driving her battered little hatchback up narrow, winding roads into the Cambrian foothills. Our plan was to camp at a remote clearing she knew. Technically still public land, but far enough off the beaten track that you'd never stumble onto it by accident. It was a 30-minute drive from the nearest village, then another 20 minutes on foot with our packs to the actual site. No cell signal, no marked trails, no other campers. Just us, the wind, and the green breath of the hills. It was beautiful. Quiet. A sort of quiet you forget exists in the city. No distant hum of cars, no chatter from a neighbor's open window. Just the occasional rustle of a bird in the bracken or the whisper of wind over grass. We set up the tent mid-afternoon and spent the day wandering a nearby stream, boiling tea on a small camping stove, and talking about nothing. I actually started to relax. Around 6 or 7, just as the sun was beginning to dip, a rusted old Land Rover crawled up the track. I remember hearing it before we saw it, an uneven rumble, as if something inside was rattling loose. It pulled up about 10 meters from our sight, and 3 men got out. They looked like locals, mud-stained boots, worn jumpers, heavy accents. My mum greeted them casually. She has that kind of ease with strangers I've never understood. I stayed sitting by the stove while they spoke. I couldn't make out every word, but it sounded like they were asking about trails or weather conditions. After a few minutes they nodded, got back into the vehicle, and drove off without a wave. Something about it stuck with me, though. They hadn't had packs, or even water bottles. Just the truck and themselves. No maps, no dogs. And I noticed, one of them, the younger one with a pale buzz cut, never stopped looking at me while the others talked to my mom. I didn't mention it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. We ate a small dinner and turned in early. The night was cold, even for July. I tucked deeper into my sleeping bag, listening to the quiet outside. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke to the sound of my mum gasping. My eyes opened fast. I could see her silhouette sitting bolt upright beside me in the tent, her head turned sharply toward the entrance. Before I could say anything, she leaned over and clamped a hand over my mouth. Her other hand pressed against my arm. I could feel how tense she was. Not shaking, just tight. Like a pulled bowstring. I froze. I could hear my own heartbeat, but otherwise, silence. Then came the footsteps. Not loud. Not stomping. But unmistakably human. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Right beside the tent. So close I could see the slight shadow shifting through the thin nylon wall. Someone moved slowly past the entrance, just inches away. The little storm flap that covered the zip fluttered once. Then again. Like someone had brushed it, deliberately. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, ask what the hell was going on, but my mum's hand stayed firm over my lips. Then, in the calmest, clearest voice I've ever heard her use, she said, "Elliot, love, pass me the shotgun." There was no Elliot. My dad's name is Elliot, but he wasn't with us. She said it with total conviction, though. No panic. Just loud enough to carry. The footsteps stopped. There was a pause, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 10, I don't know. Then a soft crunch of movement. Retreating. The steps moved back into the brush. Then the sound of faster movement. Crashing, branches snapping, and finally nothing. We didn't move for what felt like an hour. My mum kept her hand on my arm the whole time. When we finally did speak, it was barely a whisper. "They didn't leave," she said. "They parked somewhere else." I felt it. We waited until the first glow of dawn before stepping outside. Everything looked normal, in the worst possible way. No evidence. No footprints. Just dew and grass. We packed everything up in silence, fast but careful. As we walked back toward the road, my mum scanned the tree line constantly. I remember noticing, for the first time, just how many blind spots there were in that forest. How many places a person could stand and watch without ever being seen. When we reached the main road, we found something else. A small pile of stones had been placed by the entrance of the trail. 4 of them, stacked deliberately. I asked my mum if that had been there before. She shook her head. We drove straight home. Either of us spoke for most of the trip. When we finally did, she said only this: "Some people don't need reasons. I don't know who those men were, or what their plan was. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they were trying to scare us. Or maybe they'd been watching from the moment we arrived, waiting for us to fall asleep. We never reported it. What would we say? That someone walked past our tent? But I haven't been camping since. Not once. Not even in a group. Because I can't stop thinking. What if my mum hadn't said anything? What if she'd fallen asleep too? What if we hadn't woken up at all?" Story 3. 4 years ago, I lived in a house that most people in town had either forgotten or quietly chosen to ignore. It sat at the edge of a long gravel road just outside the city limits. A large, weathered farmhouse that had once been part of a working ranch, but had long since been divided into 2 apartments. I rented the upstairs unit with my boyfriend, Wes, and our 3-year-old daughter, Lila. I didn't know much about the place before we moved in. It was cheap, roomy, and had a kind of worn-down charm. The landlord mentioned it used to be a group home decades ago, back when the county dumped troubled kids into remote buildings and hoped for the best. He left it at that. It wasn't until after we signed the lease that a woman at the grocery store recognized the address and told me it had once been a home for boys with disciplinary issues, as she put it. Then, in a much lower voice, she added that it was shut down in the 80s after some ugly accusations of abuse and neglect. I wish I'd asked more questions. The apartment itself was dated but livable. Faded floral wallpaper curled at the seams in some rooms, and the floorboards creaked like they were holding on to secrets. Our bedroom had a large fireplace on one wall, though it had long since been sealed shut with wood planks and painted over. It was clear no one had used it in decades. The landlord said it was purely decorative now. I didn't think much of it. In fact, a few months in, I even decided to push our bed up against it while rearranging the room. It had this nice, old-timey mantel that looked kind of romantic, and I liked the way the headboard framed the space. Wes helped me slide the bed into place. I remember standing back with my hands on my hips, admiring it. That was a Saturday afternoon. That night was the first time I heard the voice. It was around 1 in the morning. I remember because I had just rolled over to check the time on my phone. I was still half asleep, that weird twilight state where you're aware of things but still floating between thoughts and dreams. Then I heard it, soft and close. "Mom, Mom, Mommy!" At first, I thought it was Lila. She had this habit of climbing out of bed and padding into our room if she had a bad dream. I sat up, expecting to see her little silhouette in the doorway. But the room was empty. Still, the voice was so clear. I reached over Wes, half listening, half feeling for her. I whispered her name as my hand swept across the blankets, down toward the edge of the bed where she usually stood waiting to be lifted in. "Mom, Mom!" I was still hearing it. But I couldn't feel her. Wes stirred. Then he flipped on the lamp and blinked at me like I'd just slapped him awake. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked groggily. "Lila," I said, still half lost in the moment. "She's trying to get in bed." But there was no one there. He looked at me for a beat, then got out of bed and checked her room. She was sound asleep. Curled up, breathing slow. Not a single blanket kicked off. I didn't sleep much after that. The next night, something even stranger happened. Around the same time, 1 in the morning, our dog, Charlie, started whining at the bedroom door. Wes groaned and got up to take him out. I lay there in the quiet, facing the wall, trying to will myself back to sleep. A few minutes later, I felt the bed dip behind me. Not just the sheets moving. Not just the breeze. I mean the distinct weight of someone getting into bed. The mattress sank, and there was warmth at my back, like someone's chest pressing gently against me. I didn't even question it. I assumed it was Wes. My body relaxed. Then I rolled over. No one was there. I froze. My eyes flicked across the room. The door was still ajar. I could hear the soft jingle of Charlie's collar downstairs, then the sound of Wes's voice calling to him. And in that exact second, just as the realization clicked, I felt the pressure lift from the bed, like whatever had been there had suddenly gotten up. I sat straight up, heart hammering. The sheets where I had felt the warmth were cool again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with my back against the headboard, the lamp on, the room bathed in its weak amber glow. Every sound felt amplified, the tick of the baseboard heater, the rustle of the wind outside, the occasional creak in the hallway ceiling below. The next morning, I moved the bed. I didn't explain it to Wes. I just told him I changed my mind about the layout. He didn't argue. We shoved it to the far wall, away from the fireplace. I covered the mantel with a tapestry. I never looked at it the same again. There was something about that boarded-up space, something stale and suffocating. Like it was holding something in. Or trying to. Over the next 2 years, nothing else happened. Not directly. But I noticed Lila stopped going near that side of the room. She used to play on the rug by the window, but after that week, she started avoiding our bedroom altogether unless we carried her in. I asked her about it once, and she just shrugged and said the wall was too cold. We moved out the summer she turned 5. Better school district, shorter commute for Wes. I never mentioned any of it to the new tenants, even though I saw a young couple with a toddler move in a few weeks later. I drove by once, just to see. They'd hung wind chimes on the porch and planted tulips along the steps. It looked innocent. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the room feels a little too quiet, I still think about that voice. Mom, Mom, Mommy! And I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't moved the bed. Story 4. I've only told this story to a couple of people, and even then, I skimmed the surface. Maybe because saying it out loud makes it feel more real. Or maybe because part of me still wonders if it was all some twisted misunderstanding, some fluke of high school drama that spiraled too far. But the truth is, what happened to me wasn't just creepy or uncomfortable. It was disturbing. Invasive. Like someone had crawled under my skin and set up a home. It started during my sophomore year of high school. I had just transferred to a new school in a smaller town after my dad got relocated for work. I was quiet, mostly kept to myself, tried not to stand out. But being the new kid, especially one of the only Asian students in a school that was overwhelmingly white, kind of made me stand out whether I wanted to or not. Her name was Morgan. She sat a few rows behind me in English, always scribbling furiously in a spiral notebook that she kept folded in half. We had never really spoken until one day after class she approached me. She had this bright, forced smile, and a way of speaking like she was reciting lines from a movie, every word exaggerated, rehearsed. Hi! You're Alex, right? I love your name. So exotic. I remember pausing, unsure how to respond. Thanks? She giggled. I just think Asian names are so much cooler. Where are you from? I told her my family was Korean American. Oh my God, that's so cute, she said. I love Korean food. And K-pop. And K-dramas. I'm like obsessed. That was the first time I felt a twinge of something off. Not because she liked Korean culture, but the way she said it, like I was some kind of trend or accessory. I figured it was just an awkward conversation and let it go. But from that day on, she started popping up everywhere. She joined the book club I had been part of since the start of the semester. She started sitting closer to me in class. She would find excuses to talk to me in the hall, asking about my favorite ramen, my thoughts on BTS, whether I had family back in Asia. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just lonely. But then things started getting weird. She began telling people we were dating. I found out when my girlfriend, Amanda, confronted me between classes one day. Why is that girl Morgan telling everyone you're her boyfriend? I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of joke. Wait, what? Amanda didn't think it was funny. She showed me texts her friends had sent her, screenshots of Morgan posting on social media about her sweet Korean prince, and how they've been through so much together. There were even posts referencing dates we supposedly went on. One had a photo of a sushi place in town I'd never even been to, with the caption, "Date night with Bae." I confronted Morgan the next day. Calmly. Directly. Hey, Morgan. I'm not sure where this is coming from, but I heard you've been saying we're together? She just stared at me for a second, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, soft and strange. Why are you pretending, Alex? I know you're just shy about it. It's okay. I get it. That was the moment I felt something shift in my gut. Something cold and heavy. I remember stammering something like, "You need to stop," and walking away. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, she left something in my locker. It was a plain white envelope with my name on it. No return address. No note. I was stupid. Curious. I should have waited until I was home or tossed it in the trash. But I opened it right there in the hallway, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights outside the science wing. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. Lined notebook paper, but the writing, it was insane. The first page was a letter, if you could even call it that. A frantic, rambling profession of love. She talked about our connection, how she felt it the first time she saw me, how I reminded her of her favorite K-drama character. She said we were Star-crossed lovers separated by reality. The second page was worse. It was graph paper. Every single square had my name in it. Front and back. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of tiny, tightly written, Alex, entries, as if she had spent hours, days even, just writing my name over and over and over again. The third sheet was a drawing. A colored pencil sketch of the school hallway. Me and Morgan, kissing against a locker. Amanda, my actual girlfriend, was in the background, drawn crying with black mascara tears, her hands covering her face. I didn't even realize I was shaking until the envelope slipped from my hands and hit the floor. My friend Tyler saw my face and asked if I was okay. I couldn't even answer. I just shoved the papers back inside, stuffed it into my bag, and walked straight to the guidance office. I showed them everything. The drawings. The letter. The page of names. They called her in. They called her parents. There were meetings, and awkward phone calls, and Morgan was told to stay away from me. But nothing really happened. They said she hadn't threatened me. They said she was just having trouble with boundaries. Her parents pulled her from school not long after. I never found out if it was voluntary or if the school had something to do with it. But the damage was done. For the rest of that year, I kept looking over my shoulder. Every hallway felt longer. Every creak of the floorboards in my house at night made me sit up straight. Even when Amanda tried to comfort me, I felt distant. Paranoid. I don't know where Morgan is now. I never saw her again. But I still remember that letter. The way the paper smelled faintly like her perfume. The way every line of it was soaked in a kind of desperate fantasy that made me feel less like a person and more like a character she had written into her own story. It's been years, but I still sometimes wonder if she's out there, watching, waiting, writing new chapters. And if, in her mind, the story between us never ended. Story 5. I was 17 when it happened, but I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. My Uncle Matt and Aunt Laura had this beautiful place about 40 minutes outside the city. A 2-story colonial-style home tucked along a quiet stretch of riverbank, where the streets were lined with old maple trees and everyone waved at each other like they meant it. It was the kind of place that felt calm even in the dead of winter. They had 2 little kids at the time. Ben, who was 6, and Ella, just barely 3. Every now and then, they tossed me $20 or $30 to help babysit or keep an eye on the kids while one of them ran errands or took a nap. It wasn't anything official. Just family helping family. This particular afternoon, I'd come over after school. My aunt had been up since 4 in the morning with a migraine, so my uncle asked if I could hang out for a few hours while she rested. The kids were already outside in the backyard, running around with popsicles, and Matt told me he'd be joining them in a minute after finishing something in the garage. I went inside and flopped onto the couch in the den, scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional clatter of the wind chimes on the porch. I could see the backyard through the sliding glass doors, sunlight spilling across the grass like something out of a magazine. Then I heard it. A baby crying. At first, it was faint, so faint I wasn't sure if I was hearing it at all. Just a soft, rhythmic wail coming from upstairs. I figured maybe Ella had slipped back inside without me noticing and gone up to her room. The way the house was laid out, sound traveled weirdly. Sometimes voices from the front porch sounded like they were coming from the attic. Still, the crying got louder, more distinct. That raw, high-pitched sob you only ever hear from a baby who's tired or scared. Not like a tantrum, but the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten a little, even when you don't have kids. I stood up and walked toward the bottom of the stairs. "Laura?" I called up, craning my neck toward the landing. "You guys up there?" No answer. Just the crying, steady and sharp. It sounded like it was coming from the far bedroom, Ella's room. I hesitated, 1 foot on the step. "Laura?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. That's when I noticed something strange. The front door was open, Just a crack, but enough that I could see my uncle's sneakers out on the deck. And in the yard, Ben and Ella were still running around, screaming and giggling. And there was my aunt, sitting in a lawn chair, sunglasses on, holding a can of ginger ale. Every single person was outside. But the crying? It hadn't stopped. Something crawled up the back of my neck, like the air itself had shifted. I can't explain it in any scientific way, but every hair on my arms and neck stood up like I'd walked into a freezer. There was this thick, still silence between the cries that felt wrong. Not heavy exactly, but tense. Like the house was holding its breath. I backed down the stairs. Slowly. Like if I moved too fast, I'd startle something I didn't want to see. And then I walked straight out the front door. I didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't look back. I just got into my car, closed the door, and sat there, staring at the house while my heart thumped like a war drum in my ears. The crying went on for another 10 seconds, even with the front door closed. I could hear it, faint but real. Then it stopped. Just silence. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. What would I even say? Hey, so your house made me hear a ghost baby and I ran away like a coward. It felt too weird. Too surreal. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in that stuff. I still don't, not really. But a couple years later, at a family party, after a few drinks loosened my tongue, I ended up telling my uncle the whole thing. Half laughing, half nervous, like I was expecting him to shrug it off or call me dramatic. Instead, he looked at me and went quiet. Too quiet. Then he said, "You heard it too?" It took me a second to realize he wasn't joking. He glanced toward my end across the yard, lowered his voice, and told me he and Laura had both heard the same thing. On different occasions. Always upstairs. Always in that room. They'd checked security cameras. Had the house inspected for wiring issues, raccoons in the attic, all of it. Nothing. He told me they even once thought Ella had a sleepwalking phase because they'd find her sitting in the hallway crying in the middle of the night. But every time they picked her up, she'd be ice cold, like she just walked out of a refrigerator. Then, quietly, almost ashamed, he said this. "The old owners lost a baby up there. Sid's, I think. They never talked about it, but a neighbor told us after we moved in. I didn't know what to say. I think I made some awkward joke or changed the subject. But the look in his eyes that night, it stuck with me. A few weeks later, he told me they had a mass said for the baby. My aunt's idea. Catholic guilt or faith or maybe just desperation, I don't know. But after that, he said it stopped. No more crying. No more cold spots. Nothing. I never went back into that house alone. And to this day, when I hear a baby cry, on a plane, at a store, anywhere, it sends a little jolt through me. Not because I'm scared of babies. But because for about 2 minutes of my life, I was completely, utterly convinced that something impossible was crying just upstairs. And no one was supposed to be there. Story 6. I glanced at the time as I stepped out of my car, 6:42 p.m. 13 minutes late. I jogged the short path up to the porch, mentally rehearsing my apology. The Hannigans were always laid back, but I hated being late, especially since they trusted me to watch their daughter for almost a year now. When the front door opened, I was caught mid-sentence. "Hey, I'm so sorry My words stuck. Jonah Hannigan stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the soft yellow glow from the kitchen. He looked like he'd just come in from a storm. His face was damp, not just with sweat but something more. His button-down shirt was wrinkled, one sleeve unbuttoned and hanging loosely. But it was his eyes that got me. Wide, glassy, darting. Like he was scanning me for something. "It's all right," he said quickly. "No worries. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, and immediately something felt off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, little Maddie would be babbling to herself or thumping around with her toys. Tonight, the only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. The kitchen was dim, lit only by a pendant light over the island. I saw Laura Hannigan seated at the far end, hunched over a pad of paper, scribbling furiously. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, but strands had come loose, sticking to the sweat on her temples. She didn't even look up when I came in. "I'll just go say goodnight to Maddie," she mumbled, not lifting her head. Jonah nodded but didn't respond. He was shifting from foot to foot, fidgeting with his keys. When he turned slightly, I noticed something on his cheek, a long, shallow gash, partially dried, crusted with blood. "Jesus, Jonah, are you all right?" I asked, stepping closer before catching myself. "Oh, yeah. Just a stupid accident. Shaving," he muttered, waving it off. It was a terrible lie. The cut was too jagged, too low on his cheek. But I didn't press it. "So, what movie are you guys seeing tonight?" I asked, trying to sound casual, setting my bag down on the counter. "I don't know. Haven't decided yet. We might just drive around for a bit," he said, voice flat. He didn't make eye contact. He kept glancing toward the hallway Laura had disappeared down. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally, Laura came back, but she looked different, paler, eyes rimmed with red. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding something in. She stopped in front of me, hesitated, and then stepped forward and hugged me. I was caught off guard. She wasn't normally a hugger. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice thin. "Really. You've been so good to her." Her grip tightened for just a second too long. I heard it, something caught in her throat. A sob she barely managed to stifle. Then she pulled away. "I should," she began, but Jonah gently grabbed her arm. "We're late," he said sharply. He pulled her toward the door. She stumbled after him, looking back at me one last time, eyes wide and wet, lips parted like she wanted to say something. But he pulled the door shut before she could. And then, silence. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, unsure what to do. My instincts were pulling in 2 directions, one part of me saying to chase after them, ask what the hell was going on. The other part saying just do the job, stay calm, don't jump to conclusions. I stayed. The house creaked around me as I made my way upstairs, careful not to flick on any lights. I didn't want to wake Maddie if she'd already drifted off. The hallway smelled faintly of baby lotion and that comforting scent of old wood and laundry detergent. Maddie's room was at the end. I pushed the door open slowly. Moonlight filtered in through the blinds, casting silver stripes across the crib and the rocking chair in the corner. Everything was quiet. Still. I tiptoed to the crib, expecting to see the outline of a sleeping baby under the blankets. But the crib was empty. At first, I thought maybe she was with Laura, or maybe in the playpen downstairs. But then I saw the note. It was folded neatly, placed right on top of the baby blanket, and written in Laura's unmistakable handwriting. I squinted, reading it by the cold, pale light leaking through the window. Ellie, if you're reading this, then we didn't have the courage to tell you in person. I'm sorry. He came into the house an hour ago. He has a knife. He knows who you are. He asked if anyone else would be here tonight. We told him your name. He said if we left you, he'd let us go. That he'd only take 1 life instead of 3. Maddie is safe with us now. I know it doesn't make sense. But we didn't know what else to do. We're sorry. Please forgive us. Laura, my stomach dropped. For a moment I just stood there, rereading it, willing the words to rearrange into something else. A bad joke. A mistake. Anything. But outside the window, I saw the Hannigans' SUV pulling away down the street. Laura was in the passenger seat, her head in her hands. In the back, I caught a glimpse of Maddie, snuggled in her car seat, clutching her little pink elephant. And then I heard it. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned, but the hallway was pitch black. The door hadn't been closed all the way. Now it was drifting open slowly, the old hinges whining softly. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I stood frozen, still clutching the note. That was when I realized I'd never heard the front door lock behind them. And I wasn't alone in the house. Story 7. I was 16 when it happened, but I still remember it with the same raw clarity I did the day it unfolded. The sharp scent of fresh paint mixed with sawdust. The hollow echo of construction boots pacing overhead. The taste of cafeteria mac and cheese that never left my tongue that day, no matter how much water I drank. That entire week, our school felt like it was being slowly torn down and stitched back together at the same time. Our building, St. Helena's High School, was over a century old, a hulking brick monolith with pipes that groaned louder than the students. Half the second floor had been sealed off for renovations. They put up those flimsy, semi-transparent tarps to block it off, but the pounding of hammers and the high whine of drills still cut through the noise of our everyday lives. It made you feel like you were studying inside the chest cavity of a dying animal. It was just after lunch. A Tuesday. The bell had rung and I was dragging myself up the stairs to get to my literature class. Half the hallway lights were out that day, and the flickering overhead bulbs cast jagged shadows across the corridor like something out of a fever dream. That's when I heard it. A single, sharp sound, like a watermelon dropped from a great height onto concrete. I didn't know what I was hearing at first. There was no scream, no shout, just that sound. I froze. So did the 3 or 4 other students walking near me. Then someone shouted, high-pitched, panicked, and we all moved instinctively toward the open doors leading to the courtyard. I wish I hadn't. A construction worker had fallen. He was sprawled out like a marionette someone had carelessly let go of, limbs bent in unnatural directions, his hard hat rolled several feet away. I still don't understand how he landed like that. He had fallen from the second-floor scaffolding. About 20 feet, straight onto the concrete. There was a strange moment where everyone stood still, unsure if they were witnessing a tragedy or some bizarre drill. And then chaos erupted. A teacher pushed past us, yelling for someone to call an ambulance. One of the janitors knelt beside the man and began speaking rapidly in Spanish. I think I was the only one who noticed the way the man's fingers twitched slightly. Not like a death spasm. Rhythmic. Repetitive. By some miracle. At least, that's how everyone described it later. He wasn't seriously injured. A few bruises. Some strained muscles. But no fractures. No internal bleeding. Not even a concussion. It was unbelievable. But that wasn't what stayed with me. What haunted me wasn't the sound or the fall. It was the way his eyes looked. Wide open. Glossy. Like he wasn't really there. Like he had gone somewhere else during the fall and hadn't fully returned yet. As if some part of him had stayed in the air, hovering above the scaffolding, staring down. Later that day, we were told he had epilepsy. That it had caused a sudden seizure while he was working near the edge. That was the official explanation. But rumors started swirling almost immediately. Some students claimed he'd said something before the fall. That he had been talking to someone who wasn't there. One girl swore she'd seen him remove his own helmet just moments before he slipped, like he knew he was going to fall and accepted it. Others said he didn't fall accidentally. That he jumped. But I remember something different. Something more subtle. As I was turning away from the courtyard, trying to shake the image out of my head, I caught sight of someone standing on the second floor, right at the edge where the man had fallen from. It wasn't another worker. They had all rushed downstairs. This figure was still. Motionless. Unnaturally tall. I blinked, and they were gone. Just vanished behind the hanging tarp. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Maybe it was a trick of the light. A shadow. But something about that moment didn't feel right. Like I glimpsed a page from a different story, one I wasn't supposed to be reading. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I heard that sound again. Wet, final. I saw his limbs twitching. His eyes staring. And sometimes, in the corner of my mind, I saw that figure watching from above, just standing there like it had been waiting for something. The school resumed normal operations by the end of the week. They reinforced the scaffolding, handed out safety protocols, and held a brief assembly on workplace safety. No one ever talked about the fall again. At least, not officially. But I stopped walking near the second floor altogether. Even after renovations were completed and everything was freshly painted and brightly lit, I avoided it. My friends teased me about it, called me superstitious. I didn't care. I started taking longer routes to class. I told myself it was no big deal. But I never quite shook that feeling. It's been 10 years since I graduated, and to this day, I can't walk near ledges or open balconies without feeling like something's watching me. Like I might suddenly lose control of my own body. Like I might see something no one else can. Story 8. I was 17 the last time I ever took a night walk through the woods. Back then, I had this obsession with fear, like real fear. The kind that grips your chest and steals your breath before your mind has time to explain it away. I thought if I could chase it down and confront it, I'd become immune to it. Stronger. I know that sounds dumb, and maybe it was. But at that age, I was convinced the only way to conquer something was to look it straight in the eye. Especially the things that made your skin crawl. So, on most Friday nights, while other kids were sneaking drinks or going to parties, I would head out into the woods behind my neighborhood. No flashlight. No music. Just the sound of gravel crunching beneath my sneakers and the occasional rustle of wind threading through the trees. It was reckless. Maybe even dangerous. But it made me feel invincible. That night was colder than usual. Late October, just after Halloween. The trail was covered in dry, brittle leaves that cracked underfoot like tiny bones. I remember because every step echoed so loudly in the silence. It made me feel like I was disturbing something that didn't want to be disturbed. The sky was clouded over, no moonlight to guide me. My eyes strained in the dark, but I knew the path well, too well maybe. I had walked it dozens of times, always alone, always at night. But that time, something felt off. I don't know how else to put it. The air had a heaviness to it, like I had walked into a room where someone had just been arguing. You know that feeling? That invisible tension that hangs in the atmosphere? Still, I pressed on. Deeper into the woods. Past the familiar crooked oak with the split trunk, past the half-collapsed wooden bench where I sometimes sat to listen to the wind. I should have turned back when I noticed how silent it was. Too silent. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. No rustling animals, no distant traffic. Just the sound of my own breathing, and the occasional gust of wind brushing through the branches above. Then, maybe 20 minutes in, it happened. I felt it before I saw it, someone. A shadow in the dark. I was walking up a slight incline, eyes barely adjusted, when I sensed movement. Just a flash of motion to my left. Then, a second later, I slammed into someone full body. Solid. Cold. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. Jesus! I gasped. But they didn't say anything. Didn't move. They were just there. For a split second, I tried to tell myself it was just another idiot like me. Someone doing their own weird version of night therapy. But even in the dark, I could feel it. That something wasn't right. He hadn't made a sound. No footsteps. No reaction. No startled flinch when I ran into him. Just this towering figure standing motionless, maybe 2 feet away. I did the only thing my brain could process. I turned and ran. Not a jog. Not a brisk walk. I ran like something feral had snapped in my stomach. I don't even remember screaming. I don't think I had the breath for it. The leaves whipped up around my ankles as I sprinted down the path, heart slamming in my chest like it was trying to escape. I could hear him behind me, footsteps. Heavy ones. Slamming the ground hard. No yelling. No sounds of struggle. Just this relentless pounding coming after me. I didn't dare look back. I felt like if I did, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to survive. I just ran, my muscles burning, my lungs aching. Branches slapped across my face. At one point I tripped and scraped my palms on the gravel, but I didn't stop. And then, the footsteps started to fade. That might have been the worst part. Not that he chased me, but that he stopped. Why? Why stop if you're not tired? If you're not lost? If you're not afraid? That thought stuck with me like a splinter under my skin. I didn't slow down until I saw the soft orange glow of the streetlights bleeding through the trees ahead. I collapsed in someone's front yard a few streets over, hunched over, gasping, shaking. I looked like a lunatic. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? I tried to rationalize it the next day. Maybe it was just a hiker. Or a drunk. Or some kid pulling a prank. But that silence, that stillness, that wasn't someone out for a walk. That was someone, or something, that had been waiting. The woods never felt the same after that. It's been nearly 10 years, and I've never gone back. Not once. I don't even like driving past them anymore. I still get that same tightening in my chest, like the trees themselves remember me. Story 9. I still can't explain what happened that night. And believe me, I've tried, over and over, in my head, to friends I half trust, even to a therapist once, though I watered it down. Nobody has a satisfying explanation. Not one that feels true anyway. This happened about 2 years ago, on a quiet Thursday night. I had just gotten home from a date. Not one of those whirlwind romances or dramatic flings, just a decent night out with a guy who liked hiking and said, "Rad," a little too often. We parted ways around 10:45, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, it was a little after 11. I remember everything from the moment I stepped out of my car. The air was cool, early autumn, and the house looked just like it always did, quiet, dark, familiar. My porch light had burned out a week prior, and I still hadn't gotten around to replacing the bulb. But that didn't bother me. I knew my house inside and out. Every creaky floorboard, every weird draft. I didn't need light to navigate it. I came in through the back door, slipped my shoes off without even thinking, and padded down the hallway toward the bathroom. My Shar-Pei, Bodhi, usually greeted me at the door, but I figured he was asleep. It was late, after all. The hallway was pitch black. No windows, no ambient light, just a narrow corridor that felt like walking into a void. I didn't bother turning anything on. My muscle memory knew exactly where to place my feet. After using the bathroom, I started heading back toward my room, walking slow and barefoot, yawning, already thinking about crawling under my comforter. That's when I felt it. About halfway down the hallway, something bumped into me. Hard enough to make me stop in my tracks. It was low, dense, warm. My brain registered Bodhi before I even looked down. He's always been weirdly silent on his feet, especially at night. He's about mid-thigh height and solid as a rock, just a quiet, wrinkled little tank of a dog. I smiled down into the darkness, instinctively reaching my hand out, grazing the shape of him with my fingers. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "You should be in bed, you little stalker. Good boy for checking on your mom." He pressed against my leg for a second longer, comforting, familiar. I gave him a light pat on the head, feeling the soft folds of skin behind his ears, and then kept walking. My bedroom door was mostly closed, just cracked enough for me to push it open with my foot. At the same moment I pushed it open, I flipped on the light switch. And that's when the world shifted sideways. There, curled up on the foot of my bed like he always was Bodhi. The real Bodhi. He blinked against the sudden light, raised his head lazily, and yawned. His tail thumped once against the blanket in that drowsy, half-asleep kind of way. He hadn't just climbed up. He was clearly deep in sleep. His body was still warm from being tucked up for a while, legs sprawled out in that awkward way only dogs seem to find comfortable. He hadn't moved. My breath caught in my throat. My brain tried to backpedal. Maybe he jumped back into the room really fast. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired. But no. I know what I felt in that hallway. I touched something. I spoke to it. Whatever it was the exact shape and weight of my dog. It leaned into me. And I'm not talking about a vague sense or some breeze or shadow. I felt it. The thick, muscular weight of it. The heat of its skin. I scratched behind what felt like ears. And Bodhi never moved. If he had slipped past me to get to the bed, I would have heard his claws clicking on the hardwood. I would have felt the swish of air as he passed me. The hallway is narrow. Barely enough room for both of us side by side. There's no way he could have snuck around me in the dark without brushing against my legs again. But nothing passed me. I stood frozen in my bedroom doorway for what felt like an hour, just staring at him, trying to make it make sense. Bodhi looked back at me with sleepy eyes, let out a long breath through his jowls, and laid his head back down on the blanket, completely undisturbed. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed with the lights on, staring at the open doorway. I kept expecting something, anything, to reappear in that hallway, to finish what it started. But nothing ever came. Over the next few days, I kept telling myself it had to be a hallucination. Stress, maybe? I was working long hours, had been skipping meals, not sleeping great. Maybe it was just some weird trick of the senses. But that explanation never fully stuck. Because deep down, in my bones, I know what I felt. And it wasn't just the sensation of bumping into something. It was that familiarity. Whatever it was, it wanted me to believe it was Bodhi. It leaned in like he would. It let me touch it. It even let me talk to it. It pretended. That's what haunts me. Not that I touched something in the dark, but that it wanted to be touched. Story 10. I work nights at a gas station just off Highway 22, a quiet, two-pump place with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee machine that wheezed like it was on its last breath. Most shifts were dead after 10 p.m., just truckers needing fuel, the occasional regular grabbing cigarettes, or a microwave burrito. I liked the solitude. The stillness after midnight had a strange comfort to it. It was early October, one of those nights where the cold settles into your bones and the fog hangs low over the pavement like it's hiding something. I was halfway through my shift, around 1:30 a.m., when the door chime let out its high-pitched beep. I looked up from my stool in the register booth, the glass-walled cage that management insisted we stay inside after dark, and saw a man stumbling through the door. He looked wrong. Disoriented. Pale. His clothes were damp and clung to his frame like he'd been caught in the fog too long. Blood matted the side of his head, streaking down his temple and soaking into the collar of his hoodie. I immediately stood up. "Sir, are you all right?" He didn't respond at first. Just kind of blinked at me, swaying slightly like he wasn't fully rooted in his own body. Then he murmured something I couldn't make out. I knew I wasn't supposed to leave the booth. There was a whole list of protocol taped right by the register. If a customer appears agitated, aggressive, or injured, remain behind the glass and contact emergency services. But he didn't look threatening. He looked like he needed help. And I'm not the type of person who can ignore that. I stepped out into the store, keeping my voice low and calm. "Sir, you're bleeding. I'm calling an ambulance, all right?" He turned toward me slowly. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. There was something off about them, not just from injury, but like there was nothing behind them. No recognition. No grounding. Just this blank stare that prickled something deep in my gut. Still, I pulled out my phone and called 911. I asked him to sit, but he kept shifting his weight, like he couldn't decide whether to collapse or bolt. I noticed the gash above his left ear, deep and angry, the kind that pulses with every heartbeat. Dispatch kept me on the line. EMTs were en route, they said. So were officers. I tried again to get him to sit, but he mumbled. I don't know where I was. You don't remember? He blinked. I was walking. Okay. I said, keeping my tone steady. Just stay right there, help's on the way. There wasn't a car outside. No sign of a crash. I even stepped outside briefly and scanned the shoulder, expecting maybe a wreck tucked into the trees, but there was nothing. The fog was thick, too thick to see more than 20 feet out. But still, the silence felt unnatural, oppressive. When I came back inside, the man was crouched by the drinks cooler, just staring at the bottles of orange juice. Still as stone. I kept a cautious distance. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They took one look at him, started checking vitals, asking questions. When they asked how he got the head wound, he just mumbled again. I don't know. I think I fell. They exchanged a glance, and one of them whispered something about a possible skull fracture. They loaded him into the ambulance and drove off. The police thanked me for calling it in, then followed behind. I stood there alone for a long while after that. My heart was still racing. There'd been something so uncanny about the encounter, something that didn't sit right, but I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just the way he moved, like he didn't quite belong in his own body. I got back behind the glass and tried to shake it off. Poured myself a coffee from the crusty old machine and went back to pretending the late-night world made sense. Around 4 a.m., 2 officers came back through the doors. Hey, one of them said, nodding to me. Just grabbing a coffee. I handed him a couple cups and asked, trying to keep it casual. That guy okay? The one from earlier? He paused, then looked at his partner. There was a moment's hesitation before he said, Yeah, about that. He leaned on the counter and lowered his voice. Turns out he didn't fall. He was trying to break into a house. A little girl's room, actually. Her dad caught him halfway through the window and hit him with a bat. Hard. My mouth went dry. He was already on the run. 2 other states. Sexual assault charges. One of them involved a murder. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. You were lucky, the cop said quietly, his face grim. Guy was still armed when EMS picked him up. Had a knife in his jacket. I felt cold all over. My mind raced, playing back every moment, me stepping out of the booth, walking right up to him, standing within arm's reach of that man. I'd looked into his eyes and saw nothing. They left not long after, coffee in hand, and I sat back down behind the glass like I was supposed to. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop staring at the spot by the cooler where he'd crouched. Something about the way he was frozen there. It was like he was calculating something, waiting for a moment I didn't give him. I never left the booth that night again. Not for anyone. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick across the parking lot and everything outside the glass disappears, I wonder how close I came to vanishing into it myself. Thank you for staying with me through the darkness. If you enjoy these late-night chills, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me keep the stories coming. Hit that like button if this one creeped under your skin, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss the next unsettling tale when it drops. Until next time, sleep tight. And don't turn your back on the shadows.